How 2008 Broke the Markets, the Era of Perpetual Bubble Management. Griftopia plus inside job plus modern macro reality. The 2008 financial crisis is often described as a once-in-a-generation collapse. That's wrong. 2008 was the foundational rupture that permanently altered the structure of global markets, rewired the Federal Reserve's mandate, and created the conditions for the 2020s regime of infinite liquidity, distorted asset prices, political instability, and the emergence of financial markets that no longer resemble capitalism in any traditional sense. Two sources explain this transition better than anything else. Matt Taibbi's Griftopia, a narrative of corruption, regulatory capture, and the rise of a financial, political oligarchy. Charles Ferguson's documentary Inside Job, a forensic breakdown of how academia, Wall Street, regulators, and politicians engineered a crisis and escaped unscathed. Together, they form the backbone of the modern macro worldview. 2008 didn't end in 2008. It became the permanent operating system of the global economy. This article breaks down exactly how and why. 1. 2008 wasn't a crash. It was a revelation. Before 2008, markets still carried the illusion of capitalism. Risk was supposed to have consequences. Bad investments were supposed to fail. Regulation was supposed to prevent systemic fraud. The Fed was supposed to ensure stability, not guarantee asset prices. Griftopia and Inside Job both show that by the early 2000s, this illusion was already dead. But the public didn't know it yet. 2008 made it undeniable. The crisis revealed a financial system built on fraud, regulators captured by the industry, ratings agencies selling AAA labels like a product, academic economists profiting from the system they claimed to study, political institutions that bent to Wall Street's interests, a Federal Reserve that would print money and socialize losses to protect financial elites. The crash was not an accident. It was the moment the mask fell off. 2. The system broke. But instead of fixing it, we froze it in place. After 2008, policymakers faced a choice. Option A: let the system reset, liquidate bad debts, and rebuild a functional, transparent, regulated market economy. Option B: keep the system alive at all costs, even if it meant permanently detaching asset prices from fundamentals. We chose option B. This decision created a new macro regime: zero interest rates, unlimited quantitative easing, perpetual backstops for banks and markets, moral hazard as policy, permanent asset inflation,
wealth concentration at unprecedented levels,
Fed liquidity as the primary driver of markets. The United States effectively nationalized the financial system, not by owning it, but by guaranteeing it. This is the key transition. Markets stopped functioning as markets. They became liquidity machines. 3. The Fed's job. After 2008, manage the bubble, not fix the system. The Fed never admitted this openly, but their actions prove it. Since 2008, the Federal Reserve's implicit mandate has been maintain the bubble. Let air out when it gets too hot. Pump air in when it gets too weak. Prevent a full collapse at all costs. You can track this through every major policy decision since 2010 to 2016 QE era. massive liquidity injections to reinflate risk assets. 2018 QT attempt. Markets cracked immediately. Powell pivot. 2020 COVID shock. Unlimited QE plus corporate bond buying. Markets hit all-time highs in the middle of a shutdown economy. 2022 to 2023 rate hikes. Fed tried a real tightening cycle arrow. Treasury market seized arrow. UK gilt crisis arrow. Regional bank failures arrow. BTFP emergency facility to stop systemic collapse. 2024 to 2025, markets trade entirely off liquidity expectations, not fundamentals. This is not capitalism. This is macroeconomic air pump management. The Fed isn't fighting inflation. It's managing the pressure of the bubble. 4. Why markets are detached from reality. The combination of Griftopia insights and inside job evidence shows exactly how this detachment happened. A complexity became a weapon. System grew so complex that no one, not regulators, not Congress, not even banks themselves, could model the risks. B, accountability disappeared. 0 executives went to jail. 0 structural reforms were implemented. C, bailout culture became permanent. Once you bail out once, you can never stop. The economy becomes dependent on intervention. D, financial engineering replaced productivity. The GDP growth of the last 15 years is overwhelmingly asset inflation, debt expansion, liquidity injections, financial leverage. E, markets began trading off forward liquidity, not earnings. The S&P trades off real rates, liquidity cycles, Fed balance sheet expectations, Treasury issuance, global dollar flows. Fundamentals? They matter at the margin now, but macro liquidity dominates. This is why tech valuations went parabolic. Meme assets exploded in popularity. Housing decoupled from income. Bonds started behaving like speculative assets. Crypto emerged as a parallel liquidity-sensitive system. Markets no longer reflect the real economy. They reflect the future path of liquidity. 5. The inevitable end? Bubble, shock, intervention, repeat. The system now operates in cycles that look like this. Liquidity expansion arrow asset bubble. Fed tries to normalize. Markets break. Emergency backstop. Liquidity returns. New bubble inflates. This has happened every time since 2008. The bubble is now the system. We are not avoiding collapse. We are managing the timing of the next one. This is why Taibbi calls America a grifter's paradise, and why Inside Job ends with the message, it will happen again. They were both right, structurally. 6. The macro takeaway. 2008 transitioned us to a new financial regime. Here's the macro framework. Before 2008, markets priced fundamentals plus risk. After 2008, markets priced liquidity plus policy. Before 2008, the Fed managed inflation and employment. After 2008, the Fed manages asset prices, market stability, and systemic fragility. Before 2008, crises were episodic. After 2008, crisis is the operating model. Before 2008, capitalism had winners and losers. After 2008, losses are socialized, gains are privatized. The system's survival is the primary policy objective. Conclusion: the system never recovered, it mutated. 2008 didn't break the markets and then get repaired. 2008 broke the markets. And those broken markets became the permanent architecture of the modern global economy. We now live in a financialized economy, a liquidity-driven market regime, a Fed-managed bubble system, an environment where policy drives price action, a world in which fundamentals matter less than flows. This is the legacy of Griftopia, inside job, and the crisis that birthed the modern macro era. The markets we trade today are not capitalist markets. They are Fed-curated simulations of markets, carefully air-managed to keep the bubble inflated, but never fully deflated, because a real deflation, a true clearing of the excess, would collapse the entire system built since 2008, and policymakers know it. Why inflation won't be fixed, valuations won't revert, and pre-2008 markets are never coming back. The financial world still pretends that if the Federal Reserve simply tightens enough, drains enough liquidity, or waits long enough, inflation will smoothly return to target. Valuations will fall back to reasonable, and markets will reconnect to fundamentals. That world is gone. 2008 destroyed it. COVID buried it. The 2020s exposed it. For the last 15 years, the United States has been living inside the post-crisis simulation economy, an environment where asset prices depend on liquidity, not earnings. Real rates cannot rise without detonating treasury markets. Debt loads dwarf productive capacity. The Fed's credibility has structural limits. The global dollar system is too fragile to withstand true austerity. The political system cannot survive a real deflation. And inflation is no longer cyclical. It is structural. Inflation is not a problem to solve. It's the symptom of a broken model. The real disease is that the U.S. economy, after decades of offshoring, financialization, and policy capture, cannot grow without artificial liquidity and cannot deleverage without collapse. This is why the Fed is trapped. There is no version of reality where inflation is fixed, debt is reduced, markets repriced to a sane PE, housing becomes affordable, capital costs normalize, and the system continues functioning. Those ideas belong to the pre-2008 era. The present macro environment is governed by a different rule set, one that Wall Street economists, legacy media, and old-world policymakers refuse to acknowledge publicly. The only way out of the crisis created in 2008 is to build an entirely new system in its place. And that new system, already forming in real time, is what this thesis explains. Why the old regime cannot be saved. The old regime refers to the post-1980 neoliberal plus Fed-dominant model, monetary policy as the primary growth engine, zero reserve banking, asset price inflation substituting for real growth, globalized supply chains, cheap foreign labor, debt-funded consumption, Wall Street dominance over productive investment. This model worked until it didn't. 2008 revealed its fundamental flaw. Financial engineering had replaced real economic value creation. COVID revealed its second flaw. America no longer makes anything critical. The 2020s revealed its final flaw. The Fed cannot normalize policy without detonating the system it created. So the idea that we will return to 2% inflation and 15 times earnings is fantasy. The engine that powered that world is dead. The emergence of the new macro regime. A replacement system is already forming, not through political intention, but through structural necessity. It has three pillars. 1. The return of Treasury power. Besant's framework. The U.S. Treasury, not the Fed, is becoming the primary driver of macro outcomes. Fiscal dominance over monetary policy. Industrial policy replacing pure liquidity policy. Treasury-led liquidity injections, e.g. RRP, TGA. Deficit-driven growth. Geopolitical competition requiring state-led investment. Capital reallocation through tariffs, subsidies, and incentives. This is the transition from Fed-centric capitalism to state capital plus liquidity management. 2. AI industrialism. A new industrial revolution is underway. Data centers, semiconductors, GPUs. Nuclear energy revival. Electrical grid reindustrialization. Onshoring of strategic manufacturing. A Manhattan Project scale national effort. AI is not a technology cycle. AI is industrial policy disguised as technology, and it is the only engine capable of driving the real productivity boom needed to outrun the debt. In the old regime, liquidity replaced productivity. In the new regime, AI replaces liquidity as the growth engine, with liquidity used to enable AI industrialism. 3. The end of Fed dominance. The Fed is not abolished. It is simply no longer the center of the system. In the new macro regime, Treasury sets the strategic direction. Fiscal spending drives growth. The Fed becomes balance sheet support and crisis manager. Industrial policy plus geopolitics drive capital flows. Markets respond more to Washington than Wall Street. The Fed becomes what it was never supposed to be, but always became a liquidity valve inside a larger political industrial machine. This is not a bug. It's the new model. What this means for the future. The old macro questions. When do valuations normalize? When does inflation return to 2%? Will the Fed restore price stability? Are relics of a world that no longer exists. The new questions are, how does Treasury liquidity dominance shape markets? How does AI industrial policy change inflation dynamics? How does the debt supercycle resolve without collapse? What replaces globalization as the growth engine? How do asset prices behave in a regime where liquidity is structural and productivity is the new battleground? What does a post-Fed dominant monetary system look like? How is power redistributed across government, industry, and capital markets? This thesis exists because the world is not returning to anything. We are entering something new. There is no fixing inflation. There is no returning valuations to reality. There is no restoring the old macro order. The only sustainable path forward is the new macro regime, a system driven by Treasury power, AI industrialism, and the end of Fed-dominant monetary governance. ICT,